Okay, welcome everyone to our second and final A2J only supplemental training. This is Jessica Frank with the Center for Access to Justice and Technology at Chicago-Kent. Today we're going to cover two topics, repeat loops and exiting. The first topic for today is how to create repeat loops. And we're going to focus on A2J Author 5.0 for this part. It's basically the exact same way though in A2J Author 4.0. So those of you that have projects that you're working on that need to get up on the server, on the LHI server soon, this is still applicable to you. You can still follow these same instructions on how to create repeat loops, but you'll be doing it in 4.0 instead of 5.0. Our repeat loop agenda includes what is a repeat loop, the two ways that you can do repeat loops, collecting the number first or asking to add more at the end. Then we'll talk about variables within repeat loops and additional resources. So what are repeat loops? A repeat loop, or a repeat dialogue as it's sometimes referred to, is a series of questions that will display to the end user multiple times based upon the user's input. You use a repeat loop if you have the same type of information that needs to be collected several times instead of creating questions over and over again. There are two ways to make a repeat loop in A2J Author, and both have the same outcome. You can either collect the number of items or people first, or you can ask if there are any more items or people at the end of the loop. The first way to create a repeat loop is to collect the number first. You use this when the end user will likely know right away how many times they need to go through the loop. You ask specifically for the number up front. So for example, it's commonly used when you're asking how many children do you have. People, hopefully, always know up front how many children they have to talk about. So it's a definite number and they're not going to have to make a list and start going through it. And they'll know up front how many times they need to be asked questions about their children. There are 7 steps for repeat loops done this way. The first step is to create a set of questions that will be repeated. So this set of questions would be everything you need to know about the specific, for example, children. You need to have a question about the child's name, the child's date of birth, their address, and potentially what school they're in. So you would create that set of questions first. Then you would create the counting variable. The counting variable keeps track of how many times the user has gone through that set of questions. It should always be a number on the variables list. And you can see what the red arrow is pointing to is my counting variable. You can also tell that it looks a little bit different than my other variables. That's because it doesn't follow the standard naming convention. During the hot docs portion of the training for this live training session, you talked about naming conventions for variables in that you capitalize the first letter of the first word, lowercase everything else, and then have a 2-letter indicator at the end to indicate what type of variable it is. TE for text, NU for number, DA for date. Counting variables, throw all those rules into the wind. For a counting variable, you want to capitalize both letters, both words, and don't put a space. So here, for example, child count, child and count are capitalized, and they are smushed together, no space. You can also see I have another counting variable, asset count. So if you look up from child count, 5 rows, and we get asset count, which will be in the next example that I'll show you. So I have 2 counting variables on my variables list here. Once you have a counting variable, you create your how many question. This is the first question of the repeat dialogue, but it will not be part of the questions that are repeated to the end users. So a common mistake is to make this a repeating question. A lot of times when people come to me and they say they have problems, my repeat loop's not working, it just keeps taking me through the loop, but it's not accepting any of my answers. It's because they made that how many question part of the repeat loop. So it's not part of the repeat loop. It's a jumping off point for the repeat loop, but it should only be asked to the end user once. On this question, on this how many question, on the button section, you set the counting variable to 1 in the options field. So repeat options, you go to the drop-down menu, usually it says normal. Here you're going to want to set counting variable to 1, and you're going to want to tell A2J what counting variable to use. So here I've set counting variable to 1, and I've said that my counting variable is child count. the fifth step is to identify the counting variable in the counting variable field on the questions tab of every question to be repeated. So in that last screen, I said that a common mistake is to put that how many question as part of the repeat loop. People do this by including this counting variable on that how many question. You do not want the counting variable in the counting variable section of the question text. You only want it on all the questions to be repeated. So again, all questions you want repeated, for example, what is the name of your child? What is your child's birth date? What is your child's address? You identify the counting variable under the question text section as child count. On that how many question, you do not identify it as child count because you don't want that question repeated. Here's a screenshot of the mapper, and you can identify which questions are part of the repeat and which are not. The ones that are part of the repeat have that weird little circle arrow. So child's name and child's birth date are repeated. You can see that the how many question is not repeated. Step 6, on the last question to be repeated, you want to go to the button section, and under repeat options, you want to increment counting variable. When the user presses continue then, this increases the counting variable by 1. Basically, it puts a tally mark and says to A2J Author, the end user has gone through it 1 time. The last step is to evaluate whether number of times they've gone through it, child count, is equal to how many times they said they had to go through it, which is held by the variable number of children NU. So step 7 is to create a condition on the advanced logic section to compare the number held by the counting variable to the number given to you in the first how many question. So you ask whether the number held by the counting variable is equal to the number given by the end user. If false, the end user is sent back to the first set of repeating questions. If true, the end user is moved out of the repeat loop to the next non-repeated question. So you can see my logic here. If child count, that's my repeat loop, equals number of children NU, that's what the end user told me on that how many question. If it equals that, I want them to go to do you have any, which is my next set of questions. Else, so if this is false, I want them to go back to the child's name question. You always have to put end if here for advanced logic in A2J 5. If you were doing this in 4.0, you would basically select the different components of this advanced condition. And there are training materials on how to do repeat loops in 4.0. So for the advanced logic section, this is basically the only thing that is different between 5.0 and 4.0. On our YouTube channel, we have the 4.0 video on how to do this as well if you want to watch that. The next way, or the final way, to do repeat loops is to ask the end user if they want to add more at the end. This way has 6 steps. You would do this if the end user is likely not to know how many times they need to go through the loop. And for example, people might not know exactly how many assets worth more than $100 they have up front, but they could start making a list with you. And then each time you can ask, do you have any more? Do you have any more? Do you have any more? So this first step in this way is very similar to the other way to do repeat loops. You create the set of questions that will be repeated. You then create a counting variable. Again, it should be a number. If it's not a number, it won't work. So make sure that your variable type is a number. And you can see here that asset count, this darkened one right here, is my repeat loop counting variable. Step 3 is to create a question that leads into the loop but is not part of the loop. Again, this is that jumping off question. This is not the question that is going to be repeated. This is not the do you have any more? This is the initial do you have any? So basically you're asking the end user, do you want to go into the loop or do you want to move on to a different set of questions? On the yes, so they answer the question yes, that they do have assets over $100. On the yes button, you set counting variable to 1 and you tell A2J what counting variable to use. On the no button here, you would just move them on to the next set of questions branching normally. Step 4, the section is basically the same. You put the counting variable on every question to be repeated. You do not identify the counting variable on the question tab of that leading into question. So on the question where you set the counting variable to 1, you do not identify the counting variable in the question text, just on any question you want to be repeated. Again, here's a screenshot of the mapper, and you can see that I have 2 questions that are repeated, and you can tell this by this circle arrow. There are 2 parts to step 5 here, something for a task that you have to do on the yes button and a task you have to do on the no button. So the last question to be repeated should ask the end user if they would like to add any more. So do you have another asset over $100 to add? On yes, you're going to want to increment the counting variable and tell A2J that the counting variable is asset count. You set the destination question to go back to that first set of repeat questions. So 3 parts. You set the destination question to the first of the repeating questions. You set the repeat option to increment counting variable, and then you tell A2J what counting variable to use, in this case asset count. On the no button, you move the end user out of the loop to the next non-repeated question. So destination is, in my case, it's the all done question, and the repeat options are normal. They are done with the loop. They don't need to deal with anything else in the loop. We'll talk now a little bit about how variables are dealt with in a repeat loop. Variables in a repeated question are set up normally. The only variable that's different in repeat loops is the counting variable itself. Otherwise, variables are exactly the same. So child's name, here is an example of a question where I'm asking what is the child's first name. Variable child name first TE, set up exactly the same as if it wasn't in a loop. The only difference is that the question is identified as being part of the repeat dialog by including that counting variable in the question text itself. You can see that A2J Author, the way that repeat variables are done, A2J Author appends a # or hashtag and the loop number to the variable name, basically creating new variables each time it's through the loop. So child name first TE becomes child name first TE number 1, child name first TE number 2. So you can see here, this is my variable in my script pane in preview mode that I'm showing here in the screenshot. You can see child name first TE number 1, first time through the loop, I put Betty. Second time through the loop, I put John. You can see here it says child name last TE, first time through the loop was Doe and Doe. So it's Betty and John Doe. So A2J Author automatically adds this appendage. You don't have to do anything for it. However, all of the variables, all of the values that you've input are stored within that one variable still. So A2J Author makes this, if we go back, child name first TE becomes child name first TE number 1 and child name first TE number 2. But the values of Betty and John are still both stored in child name first TE. Why is that important? Why would you want to know that? You can use repeat loops, or you can use variables from repeat loops to call out information. So on that, do you have another asset over 100 to add? That list that the end user is making with you. The end user could ask a question, well, what assets have I told you about already? They may not be sitting there next to their computer making a list on a piece of paper. You can make that list for them by showing them all the values that are held within that variable. So in the Learn More Answer section, you can say, you've told me about your, and use a macro to call out all the values held by asset name TE. So you've told me about your house and your car. A2J Author automatically puts the and in, and if there are 3 or more, it will put a comma and the and it will keep comma delineating for you automatically. So you can call out all the values held by that variable to help your end user. If you want to call out just one specific value, then you can use this macro, %, bracket, variable name, pound, counting variable, close bracket, %. This shows the value of the variable according to which round of the loop the current question is displaying for. So in a previous question here, I had said, what is your child's name? And they had told me that Joey was the name of their child. Then I can use the text, what is child first name TE, pound, child counts, date of birth. And A2J will display to the end user, what is Joey's date of birth? The next round it would be, what is Betty's date of birth? What is Jimmy's date of birth? It helps customize it further for your end user based on information they've already given you for that set of loop. Finally, you can use a macro to call out the ordinal for that specific round of the loop. So it shows, if you use this macro, it'll show you the words first, second, 144th, whatever, according to which round of the loop the current question is displaying for. So this is that question, what is the name of the third child? And then they would tell me Joey was the name of the child. Then I would go back to that example I showed you before and then say, what is Joey's date of birth? But this just lets me use the ordinal to help remind the end user again, which child are they talking about? Additional resources, our authoring guide for 5.0 is almost done, and it will be posted to our A2JAuthor.org website. The authoring guide for 4.0 is 300 plus pages, so it has plenty of information as you're going through making your guided interviews in 4.0. That is available on old.a2jauthor.org. That's old.a2jauthor.org. No www. And like I mentioned, our trainings and presentations on repeat loops specifically and other features of A2J Author are available on our YouTube channel. So quickly before we go into exiting, I'm going to take you into A2J Author 5.0, and I'm going to go into the repeat example that I made for 5.0. If at any time you want to see the repeat loop example, it's actually part of one of our sample interviews. So you can see here I'm in A2J Author 5.0. And repeat loop example is one of our sample interviews. So we'll just go into it quickly. Go into preview and you can see what I'm talking about. I'm going to open the variables in the script tab so you can see what's going on as we go through it. So here's a sample, one that I created. So let's say, go through it. So this is that how many children question. How many children do I have? I have 2 children. What is the name of the first child? What is that child's date of birth? What is the name of the second child? And you can see here, going on in the scripting window, there was a logic on that last question. And I was asking A2J Author to evaluate whether child count equals number of children NU. Well, it doesn't, because child count is 1. We've only gone through the loop once. And number of children NU was 2, because I said I needed to go through the loop 2 times. I had 2 children. So what is the name of the second child? What is Joey's date of birth? Now that same condition, if you look over here to the left, let me get my highlighter out. That same condition, if child count equals number of children NU, is green and has a checkbox because it's been fulfilled. And then it moves me out of the loop and into the next set of questions. Now we're in that asset, asking to add more at the end. So do I have any assets over 100? If I press no, it wouldn't even take me through the loop. If I press yes, then what is your first, that's the ordinal, first asset? Say it's a boat. And the value is $1,000. Do you have another? If I said yes, what is the second asset? Car. Say that's $1,000 too. Do I have another? Here, do I have another? If I don't have another, then if I click no, it's going to take me to the end. If I click yes, then it's going to take me through the loop again one more time. So click no, and it's taken to the end. If we go back, click yes, it will take me through the loop again. The final thing that we're going to cover for our A2J only section is exiting. I'm focusing this section on exiting in A2J Author 4.0 because we're still working out the technical details about how A2J Author's answer files are going to be passed to LHI with A2J Author 5.0. So this exiting is just focused on 4.0. I want to make sure that we get everything nailed down with our partners before I give you a training on how to exit in 5.0. It should be relatively the same though. So if you are learning this, planning on just doing A2J Author 5.0 interviews, it should be pretty similar. The exiting agenda today, we're going to cover three main options available to you as an author to move end users out of an A2J guided interview. We have success process form, exit user does not qualify, exit to save, both save incomplete and resume, and all of these exiting options are set in the question design window buttons tab. So the first and most common with any A2J guided interview is success process form. The success process form button function takes a user to LHI to get their completed document. So this top is a screenshot where it says click get document to get their completed document. End user clicks this, takes them out of the A2J guide interview, closes it, and takes them back to LawHelp Interactive where they can get their document or save their answers. You want to use this button only once in any given A2J guide interview, so it's only used one time. It's set by branching normally. So on this get document question, instead of branching to a different question, you would just branch to the A2J command success process form. The second most commonly used way is exit user does not qualify. The exit user does not qualify button closes the A2J guided interview. If you have this and you don't include a URL, which we'll talk about in just a minute, the A2J guided interview will just close for your end user. So you want to make sure that you explain before you kick someone out of the interview what's going to happen to them, because this can be a little unnerving if they were to accidentally get here and then automatically get kicked out. On that exit user doesn't qualify, when you select that as a destination question, up will pop a place that you can type a URL. That URL will take the user to a website, whatever one you put in, upon exiting the interview instead of just closing it out and taking them nowhere. For example, why would you use this? You might use this feature if an end user doesn't meet your organization's need-based limits, but maybe you can send them to a low-cost loyal referral website. Or this isn't the proper form for them to use for any number of reasons, but you have another area of your website that would be better. You can take them to whatever URL you'd like. The last main exiting option is save and resume. For those of you that are not using LawHelp Interactive, this is a feature that is only enabled on LawHelp Interactive because they have the capability for creating accounts. You could, in theory, set this up on your own server if you had the ability for end users to create accounts and come back. But this exit, save, and resume allows the end user to exit a guided interview partway through, create an account on LawHelp Interactive, and then come back later to that spot in the interview where they had exited and continue on. Not all guided interviews have this. Many shorter guided interviews, the author just decides that it is more effective, or they want to push the end user to finish rather than giving them the exit, save, and resume option. But for longer interviews, this is definitely an excellent feature to give your end user. And here's how to do it. You create one question that is not linked to any other question in the interview. So you can see in my screenshot here of my map, this question, there's no line connecting it to any other question. It's standalone. It's not linked to anything. On that question, you explain that you are now exiting the interview. You'll be redirected where you can create an account, save your answers. If you make a mistake, you want to return. If you really want to leave, click exit. If they make a mistake, there's the resume feature. If they really want to exit, there's the exiting button as well. The second step is to identify the single question as the exiting question below in the question list. So this is an example in 4.0 of the map and the question list. At the bottom, you have the exiting question. Generally, this is blank, but if you put a question here, that standalone question, you tell A2J to enable this exit button to show up as a preview to the end user. If there's nothing here, this exit button will not show up. If you put something here, then this exit button will display to the end user. And when they click that, they will be taken to that standalone question. On that standalone question, you set the destination question for the exit button to the A2J command exit save incomplete form. That's an A2J command. You can tell that it's an A2J specific command and not one of your other questions because it's in brackets. On the return or go back or whatever you want to call button, they basically made a mistake. They didn't mean to click exit. You're going to want to use exit resume interview to take them back in. If you do have questions while you're working on your A2J guided interviews, you can always feel free to reach out to me at jbolek@kentlaw.iit.edu, or you can call the office. My phone number is there. We also monitor the document assembly, and LSNTAP, LS Tech listservs. So if you have questions about A2J Author, you can post those there as well. Thank you very much for attending, and have a great day.